Let's discuss how to play ace king in small stakes, no limit hold'em cash games. Many players say that they hate ace king and that they don't think it's even all that good of a hand when they are playing small stakes cash games because they think if they don't get top pair, top kicker, they cannot win the pot. And that is simply not true. Ace king is actually one of the most profitable hands you will be dealt in no limit hold'em, and if you cannot profit with it, well, you're not going to profit with much of anything else. The big leak a lot of people have is that they do not realize that ace king is very often not a premium hand, but instead a marginal made hand, both pre-flop and post-flop. When we say marginal made hands, we have 4 categories of hands we discussed thoroughly at PokerCoaching.com. You have your premium made hands that are thrilled to get money in. You have your marginal made hands that want to get a little bit of money in. You have your draws, and you have your total garbage. And ace king is kind of on the borderline between a premium made hand and a marginal made hand, especially when a lot of money starts to go in the pot. I've experienced this a lot when I've been playing 1-2 no limit on coin poker recently. My students have told me that they are experiencing the same thing in live cash games. So if you are struggling with ace king, this video is for you. You're going to learn why ace king is an amazing hand that should be very profitable for you. You're also going to learn how to stop getting stacked with ace king before the flop when you are against a strong range. And you're going to learn how to avoid losing your stack post-flop when you happen to be behind. Before the flop, ace king is a great hand by pretty much any measurement, but when you're playing deep stack, you will rarely want to get it all in before the flop, especially if your opponents are not crazy. Now, if your opponents are raising and 3-betting and 4-betting with the 9-4 offsuit and the jack-3 for fun, then sure, ace king's great. But if your opponents are playing reasonably well, they're not going to be 4-betting with a wide range of junk. They're just going to have a really good hand. You're going to find that ace king does really well against a normal range, such as when your opponent makes a pre-flop raise, but when they 3-bet or 4-bet or 5-bet and their range starts to contain maybe only aces, kings, queens, jacks, and ace king, well, ace king actually does really, really poorly, and it does especially poorly if their range is aces and kings. So you want to make sure you do not overplay ace king before the flop, because as you put in more and more re-raises, your opponent's range is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter to the point that ace king does not love it anymore. So you're going to want to play pots in position. You're going to want to keep the pot manageable, and if a lot of money starts to go in, you may need to find yourself folding ace king, and this is especially going to be true multi-way and as you get deeper and deeper and deeper stacked. Let's take a look at some game theory optimal pre-flop charts. Here, we have 100 big blinds in the hijack versus a low jack, 3 big blind raise. The low jack is first position if you are playing at a 6-handed table, kind of middle position if you're playing at a 9-handed table, right? Just presume the first 3 people fold. So they raise to 3 big blinds, and you see right here, both ace king suited and ace king offsuit are re-raising sometimes, that's the red color, and calling sometimes, that's the green color. The blue is folding. But you see, you're not just 3-betting ace king already, just against a pre-flop raise. You're not happy to 3-bet it all the time, because when you 3-bet it and get 4-bet, you don't love it. So call it some portion of the time, especially when it's offsuit. How about 100 big blinds deep? You raise to 3 big blinds in the cutoff. The small blind re-raises to 12 big blinds. Here's the cutoff strategy. Notice ace king suited calls every time, and ace king offsuit calls about half the time. Notice pocket aces also slow plays, because you want to be slow playing aces and queens and jacks and tens, because you want to be able to call lots of suited connected stuff. If you 4-bet all of your best hands, well, then you don't get to call quite as wide, because then your calling range is a little bit weaker going to the flop. But as you see, ace king is not just automatically getting it in for 100 big blinds. And this is something a lot of people do wrong. They just shove it all in, or they click it back every time. And that is probably going to be a mistake, especially if your opponent is not 3-betting this small blind quite wide enough. And most people in the blinds don't 3-bet nearly often enough to begin with. So if anything, you may actually want to play even a little bit more cautiously than this, which means just calling your ace king and going to the flop in position. Let's take a look at a few other spots. Here, the hijack raises to 3 big blinds. You, in the cutoff, 3-bet to 10 big blinds. Okay? The big blind then makes it 24 big blinds. So hijack raises. That would be first stacked if there were 5 players at the table. You in the cutoff, that's to the right of the button, make it 10 big blinds with ace king, perfectly fine. The big blind then 4-bets to 24 big blinds, and then the hijack shoves it all in. So, at this point, both the big blind and the hijack have very clearly announced they have a very good range. Okay? So if they have a very good range, what do you do at this point? Well, you fold everything. Notice you're only getting your money in with aces and kings sometimes. Now, I would put it in with kings every time, but queens and ace king, just fold. And this is only 100 big blinds deep. If you're playing deeper and deeper stacked, you should be folding even more often. Now, obviously, never fold aces, but king starts to become close if your opponents are trying to get it in for 200, especially if they are tighter than the GTO strategy when it comes to playing the aggressive lines. And while a lot of people are loosey and goosey in small stakes games and with deep stacks, when they start to put in 3 bets and 4 bets and 5 bets, they're going to have a really good hand far more often than they don't. So ace king is just a fold. Take a look at this scenario. Here, the low jack makes it 3 big blinds. The cutoff makes it 10. The button makes it 23. And then you're in the big blind. What do you do in the big blind with pocket queens or ace king offsuit? Well, you fold. Simple as that. So when a lot of action takes place before the flop, ace king shrivels up substantially. And this is something a lot of people don't get. They just look at their ace king and they put their money in every single time. Automatically. They think ace king is great. I'm probably flipping it worst. But no. When your opponents are loading the money in, they probably have the nuts. All right. Postflop. It does not like the word postflop. Postflop is scary. I get it. The key to playing ace king well postflop, though, is to classify your hand correctly. Typically, ace king on the flop will either be a premium made hand when you get top pair, top kicker, or better, or a marginal made hand when you don't get top pair, top kicker. Every once in a while, top pair, top kicker is a marginal made hand if there's 3 to a straight or 3 to a flush out there, but it is very important to classify your hand properly. And you're going to find that most people don't know how to play their marginal made hands well in general, and ace king is no different. Marginal made hands should typically play passively. You do not have to automatically continuation bet every flop. You want to control the size of the pot and look to get to the showdown against a wide range of hands, because against a wide range of hands, top pair, top kicker, or an under pair, or something like that, a medium strength made hand is actually pretty great. But if you bet and get raised, or if you bet the flop and bet the turn and bet the river and get called down, you are going to be behind pretty much every time with your marginal made hands. So let's take a look at an example where someone screwed up. Here we have ace king. We raise it up to $6 and the cutoff. The button calls, small blind calls, big blind calls. Flop comes, jack, 6, 3, check, check. With ace king, this is a spot where we have a very easy check in my mind. Typically, when you raise and multiple people call, you don't want to be continuation betting all that often in general from out of position. And I realize this board's kind of uncoordinated. Ace king could be the best hand, and if you do bet and get called, it has some outs. But you're just not going to get a whole lot of folds here. So that's going to result in you going to the turn a lot with the worst hand. A lot. And another problem is that if your opponents do call with a hand like, let's say, king, queen of hearts, or queen, 10 of hearts, and it goes check, check on the turn, they're going to bluff those on the river, and you're probably going to have to fold. So this is just a hard hand to get money out of the pot with. So check and try to improve the top pair. This player bets $12, though. If you are going to bet, you probably want to bet even smaller on this very uncoordinated board, like 6. If you told me you wanted to bet $6 with the ace king, I wouldn't hate it. But I definitely hate bigger bets, because as you bet bigger and bigger, when you get called, you're going to be drawing to 6 outs or maybe 3 outs. And the problem is whenever they have a hand like ace jack or king jack, and you improve the top pair, top kicker, sometimes you're still crushed. That's really bad for you. We bet 12, button calls, small blind calls, big blind folds. We are done with this pot. Turns to 2, check, check. Button bets 20, small blind folds. We definitely need to fold now. We have the worst hand by a mile. But this player decides, you know what, ace king's pretty good. But just because it's good pre-flop does not mean it's good post-flop. And right here, you are doomed. You are totally doomed. And yes, you may be getting bluffed sometimes by the queen, 10 of hearts. But look, the button's betting into 2 people using a medium-ish size. They probably have something good. River's a jack. We check. Opponent bets again. We finally fold. Fine, right? One street was played well here. They finally folded. This is a scenario, though, where you should simply check the flop and probably fold to a bet, multi-way. Or if you do decide to bet the flop, bet tiny, and then proceed very cautiously from there. Let's take a look at a hand that was played a little bit better. Here we have ace king again. We raise from the cutoff. Button calls. Big blind calls. 10, 6, 3. We have the backdoor nut flush draw. Big blind checks. We check. You may say, why check with the backdoor nut flush draw and 2 overcards? That's pretty good. You're going to find in general the 10 high boards and lower are pretty great for the big blind caller and also the button caller. And for that reason, we just don't get to continuation bet these flops very often at all. Again, if you told me you really wanted to bet like $5 into the 19 pot, I wouldn't hate it. But checking is definitely going to be ideal. Turns to 10. Just keep checking. We could have the best hand. River's a queen. Check. Check again. Button bets 12 bucks into the 19. Big blind folds. Okay. At this point, you may say, easy fold, right? But I think this is actually kind of close to a call against a lot of players who will try to take a stab at the pot once it just checks down. Because if this player's sitting here with a random king jack, jack 9, 9-8, 9-7, ace 5 that decided to not bet the flop and or the turn, which, you know, they didn't have anything, or at least with a lot of those hands, they didn't have much. Some people will decide to try to bluff in this scenario. Now look, pot odds exist. You do not need to win 100% of the time in this scenario. You need to win something like 29% of the time in this scenario. So not all that often, maybe even less. It's early in the morning. My brain is slow. If your brain is slow early in the morning, do me a favor. Click the like and subscribe button down below. Click the notification bell. Commiserate with me a little bit. This early hour. So this is a scenario where I think calling is probably close. If you told me you wanted to fold against weak, tight, straightforward players, I wouldn't hate it. But if your opponent is the type of player who will try to steal the pot, calling's probably okay. That's what we did here. We folded. Fine. And I think this is fine, right? I will say in general, when it does this check, especially if the river is kind of a blank, like say the river's a 3, something that the opponent just doesn't have very often, or like a 2 or a 4, and the button bets, and then the big blind folds, I'm going to be pretty call happy. But look, again, notice in this spot, we lost $6, right? We lost no money. And that's kind of what you want with your marginal made hands. And realize that ace-king is very often good when it does check down. But when, especially more than one bet goes into the pot after the flop, ace-king, if it doesn't improve, is not good very often. Next, let's discuss another mistake that people make. Not quite as often, but they still do. There are 2 scenarios that come up quite often. Number 1 is that they slow play when they do make a strong hand. A lot of people do not go for full value either. So a lot of players make top pair, top kicker, and they play it slowly, or they make top pair, top kicker, and they decide to not try to stack their opponent. Both of these are pretty big mistakes because, especially in small stakes games where your opponents will just pay you off every time if they have a clear second best hand, you need to be getting money in the pot. Let's take a look at 2 examples. We have ace-kings suited. We raise it up in the hijack. Big blind calls. King 10-2. 2 spades. This is great. They check. We're going to want to bet on the larger side. Pot's 13. We go 7. I can be convinced that even bigger is better, given the board is very draw heavy. I get that we don't care about the draws in this scenario because we have the nut draw. But if your opponent does have any sort of gut shot, open-ended, flush draw, pair, they're just not going to fold to a $10 bet. So I might even bet a little bit bigger in this scenario. Turn is a 6. They check again. This player checks it back. This is a absolute disaster. An absolute disaster. Horrible, 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 horrible play. A lot of people in the spot think, okay, I'm going to play it slow and try to trap them or let them improve. But you have to realize that if they're sitting here with a pair, they're not going to fold to a medium-ish bet of something like $20 into the 27 pot. And if they have nothing, they're just going to fold anyway. Maybe they even decide to get frisky and check raise you if they're sitting here with the queen 9 for fun. Not that they should do it, but some people will. So this is definitely a spot where you want to be betting straight up for value and just trying to get money in the pot to the best of your ability. Slow playing here is horrible. Not just bad, horrible. If you saw this turn and thought, okay, we should check. Well, that is a horrible play, and if you stop making that mistake, your win rate will skyrocket. River's a 7, they check. You bet big. This player goes 14. I definitely would have gone bigger. Again, 20, 22, 27. Because, especially when a lot of draws on the flop miss on the turn and the river, a lot of people will automatically put you on a busted draw if you decide to bet on the larger side, thinking you're trying to buy the pot. And look, ace-king's good every time. So I like that this player bet, but they should have bet bigger. They do bet, they get called, they were against king-jack. And the thing is, a lot of people in the hijack seat in this scenario think, okay, I won the pot, I didn't get outdrawn, I got paid off on the river, this is great. Without realizing, they had top pair, top kicker against top pair, third kicker on a draw-heavy board. If they just bet bigger on the flop, they would have got more money in. They could have then bet bigger on the turn and got money in, and then they could have blasted the river, because a lot of draws missed, and gotten paid off fully. Not getting paid off fully in this scenario is unacceptable. This player won, what, $27? 13 big blinds, when they should have won, I'm not going to say the full 100, but certainly 40, 50, 60, something like that. They should have gotten a lot of money in the pot here. And that's a blunder. Next, we raise it up with ace king. Big blind calls. Ace, 7, 5. They check. This is another board where you can bet on the medium to large side. I think $10 is fine. Anytime there are straight draws and or flush draws on the flop, but no straights or flushes yet, these are usually scenarios where you want to be betting somewhat polarized with your best hands and your draws using a larger size. Now, realize the 7 and the 5 are not that coordinated, but they do connect okay with the big blind. So I would maybe even go a little bit bigger, but whatever. 8's fine. Big blind calls, turns a king of clubs, putting up backdoor flush draw. Big blind checks. This is a great spot to bet big. If your opponent does have any sort of draw, you don't really want to give them great pot odds to continue. If they have an ace, you want to get full value from them. And let's load the money in. Pot's 29. We go 45 over pot. Now, I will say in some games, some players may view this over pot size bet as clearly strong and they'll fold literally everything. If your opponents are weak and tight and straightforward and they will fold everything that's worse than 2 pair on the turn to an overbet, what should you do? How should you adjust? Well, you should take every single hand and bluff it for more than the size of the pot because your opponent's not going to have 2 pair or better very often at all. So imagine you are sitting here with the Jack 10 that decided to raise, and your opponent's going to fold an ace to an overbet, blast them, and win all the pots where they don't improve to 2 pair. They're not going to improve to 2 pair all that often on pretty much any turn. Do not be afraid to maximally exploit your opponents. However, this is a spot where if your opponent does have an ace, they should stick around. If they have a flush draw, well, you want to give them bad odds. So overbet, go for it. And if they are going to put money in with any top pair, which they probably should if you're willing to bluff, then you want to make sure you're getting full value with your best hands. Also, this is going to allow you to shove the river. Right? Notice once the opponent calls, the pot's $119 and you have 141 remaining in your stack. When they check the river on pretty much any river, besides clubs, maybe even on clubs, some clubs are worse than others, clearly. This is a spot where I'm going to be shoving. And on the river too, yeah, they could have the 4-3 for the double gut shot straight draw, but they could also have a whole lot of other worse stuff. They check, we rip it in, they call. They had the ace 2 of clubs. They got unlucky to make it 2. And you may say, oh, maybe they don't pay you if they don't improve. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. It's tough to know. But if they were sitting here with a good ace, they're probably going to pay. If they had 2 pair, any of them, they're going to pay. And this is a spot where you want to go for full value. Also, do not be afraid of the random 4-3 because while they could have it, they could also have all sorts of other weaker hands that will pay you off. This is another scenario where a lot of people don't bet big enough on the turn, meaning they don't get to shove the river, and they see any straight card on the river as potentially scary. And yeah, it is a little scary. You could be beat, but more often than not, you're not, and you need to be going for full value. So that is it. Those are some tips for playing ace-king in small stakes cash games. Remember, pre-flop, do not overplay ace-king and learn the spots where you need to be folding it, especially when a lot of people want to put in a lot of money. Post-flop, you need to make sure you classify your hand correctly and adapt on every single betting round. You need to stop overplaying your marginal made hand. Ace-king high is not all that good, especially multi-way. You also need to stop slow playing when you do get a made hand, like top pair, top kicker, and you want to make sure you are getting full value. This often implies using larger bets and not being afraid of a few draws when the few draws happen to come in. Now, if the river completes the straights and the flushes, and it's the most likely ones your opponents could have, maybe you start to be a little bit more cautious then. But like on that random 2, even though a few straights get there, go for value. If you focus on these things, you will massively increase your win rate with ace-king in small stakes cash games, which is exactly what I want for you. That's it for today. Before you leave, click the like and subscribe button down below. Also, do me a quick favor. Share this video with your friend who always complains about ace-king. All of us have a friend who complains about ace-king. So do me a favor and share this video with them. It will change their life.